The first thing they did was shave our heads, not with clippers or any mechanical device, with rusted straight razors that pulled as much as they cut. We stood in lines of 50 in a processing facility that smelled of disinfectant, and something underneath the disinfectant that the chemicals could not fully mask. Decay, perhaps. Fear processed into sweat and left to accumulate in concrete walls. The man who shaved my head had 3 fingers missing on his left hand. He did not speak. None of them spoke. They simply processed us from one station to the next with the efficiency of a manufacturing line. I was 26 years old. My name was Jarek Voust. I had killed a man in the lower stacks of Hive Tertius on Vangroth. The man had owed me currency and refused payment. I had used a pipe. The arbitrators found me 6 hours later in a recaf dispensary, 3 levels down, still wearing the blood on my jacket. They sentenced me to execution by firing squad. Then they commuted the sentence to penal service in the 87th Penal Legion. Term of service duration, until death or imperial pardon. I learned later that execution would have been faster. My mother had worked textile machines in the mid-hive factories. She died when I was 14, lung rot from the chemical dyes they used in the fabric processing. My father I never knew. The lower stacks raised me, taught me that violence was currency and trust was a luxury no one could afford. I had killed before the man with the debt. Twice. Small things. Disputes over territory and perceived disrespect. But those bodies had disappeared into the underhive recycling systems, and no arbitrators cared enough to investigate deaths in zones where life was already expenditure. The man with the debt had connections. His brother was a guild foreman with enough influence to demand investigation. That was my era, killing someone whose death would be noticed. They transported us to the Penal Legion mustering grounds in bulk haulers, designed for cargo, not humans. 473 prisoners packed into a hold with minimal ventilation and no sanitation facilities. The journey took 6 days. 3 men died during transport, 1 from infection after a fight, 2 from what the guards logged as medical complications, but which looked more like beatings that had gone too far. We stood in the bodies for 11 hours before the guards removed them. No one spoke about it. Speaking drew attention, and attention in the hauler meant becoming a target. The 87th Penal Legion mustered on a training ground outside Hive Tertius, a tract of land where nothing grew and the soil was the color of rust. They assembled us in formation blocks of 1,000 men each, 10,000 total. I learned later that this was the standard deployment size for a penal legion, large enough to be tactically useful, small enough that losing the entire formation would not significantly impact Imperial military capacity. The commissar introduced himself as Brecht. He wore the standard black uniform and peaked cap. His bolt pistol hung at his hip in a holster that had been worn smooth by use. He was perhaps 40 years old, his face carrying the particular hardness that comes from years of executing men. He addressed us from a raised platform with amplification equipment that made his voice echo across the training ground. "You are criminals," he said. "Murderers, thieves, heretics, traitors. You have sinned against the Emperor and the Imperium. You are owed nothing. You possess nothing. Your lives are forfeit. What remains is the opportunity to die with purpose, rather than against a wall." He paused. The wind moved across the training ground, carrying dust that stung exposed skin. "You will fight where you are sent. You will obey every order without question. Hesitation is cowardice. Cowardice is treason. Treason is death. You will die earning redemption, or you will die as the criminals you are. The Imperium makes no distinction in its accounting, only in how your name is recorded after." He explained the terms then: service duration until death or pardon, pardons granted based on performance in combat, evaluated after each campaign. Exemplary service could earn reduction in sentence or full pardon. Survival was not guaranteed, redemption was possible. Both required blood. I stood in formation block 7, row 43, position 18. The man to my left had tattoos covering his face. gang marks from the underhive. The man to my right had acid scars on his neck and would not make eye contact with anyone. Behind me stood someone who breathed through his mouth constantly, a wet rattling sound that suggested respiratory damage. We did not speak. We did not exchange names. Names were not relevant. We were no longer individuals. We were components in a formation designated 87th Penal Legion. They issued us uniforms, grey fatigues with an orange stripe down the leg, the color marking us as penal troops. No rank insignia, no unit badges, no names. Each uniform had a number stenciled across the back. Mine was 877318, Regiment, Block, Row, Position. That was my designation. That was all I required. They issued us lasguns. Standard Mark III pattern, worn from previous use but functional. The Commissar explained that each weapon was registered to our designation number. If we lost the weapon, we would be executed. If we used the weapon for anything other than killing the Emperor's enemies, we would be executed. If we damaged the weapon through negligence, we would be executed. He demonstrated the bolt pistol at his hip by executing a man in Formation Block 3 who had laughed during the weapons brief. The sound echoed across the training ground. The body fell. No one moved to catch it. The man had been dead before he hit the ground. That is how quickly redemption ends, the Commissar said. Remember it. They taught us basic infantry tactics, formation movement, fire discipline, equipment maintenance. They did not teach us to trust each other. Trust was not required for Penal Legion operations. They taught us to follow orders because following orders kept you alive slightly longer than not following orders. They taught us that the man next to you was not your comrade, merely another criminal whose survival or death held no meaning beyond its impact on formation strength. The violence started in week 2. The Penal Legion drew from every stratum of criminal murderers, heretics, gang enforcers, failed revolutionaries, men who had spoken against the Imperium, men who had stolen from the wrong people, men whose crimes I could not identify, but which were severe enough to warrant death sentence commuted to penal service. 10,000 violent men packed into training barracks, with minimal supervision and a command structure that considered casualties during training an acceptable cost. Men died in the barracks, stabbed with improvised weapons, beaten to death in disputes over territory or perceived insults, strangled in the night. The commissariat did not investigate. They simply removed the bodies and adjusted the formation numbers. By week 4, we had lost 213 men to internal violence. The commissars executed another 47 for various infractions: theft, insubordination, attempted desertion, fighting during formation hours. A hierarchy established itself through violence. The strongest, most brutal men claimed positions of dominance. They controlled access to better sleeping spaces, to extra rations when those could be stolen, to protection from random violence. The cost of protection was submission. I watched men who refused submission disappear. I watched men who accepted submission degrade into something that was no longer fully human. They existed as extensions of whoever dominated them, performing whatever function was demanded. I did not seek protection. I did not challenge the hierarchy. I existed in the middle spaces, visible enough not to be seen as weak, invisible enough not to be seen as threat. This required calculation. It required knowing when to respond to provocation and when to ignore it. It required understanding that every interaction was an evaluation, and appearing too weak or too strong would mark you as target. I killed my second man in the Penal Legion during week 5. He was a former gang enforcer who controlled sleeping space in Barracks Section 9. He decided I was weak enough to dominate. He approached me during evening rations with 3 others, told me I would be surrendering half my food and sleeping space. I put a sharpened piece of metal into his throat. I had prepared it days earlier, ground down from a broken piece of equipment hidden in my boot. The other 3 backed away. The man died on the barracks floor. The commissar on duty investigated, determined it was self-defense within acceptable parameters, and ordered the body removed. I kept my full rations and my sleeping space. 2 men approached me the next day and asked if I wanted to join their group. I declined. Groups drew attention, and attention meant the commissars would be watching for any sign of organized resistance. Groups also required trust, and I had learned in the Underhive that trusting others was a liability I could not afford. I met him in week 6, 3 days before our deployment orders arrived. His designation was 8732109, though I learned later his name had been Kale Vorin. He was from a different hive world, Gradius Prime. He told me where he had served in the local enforcers before being convicted of killing a superior officer who had ordered him to execute civilians during a riot suppression operation. He had refused the order. He had been convicted of treason. He was 31 years old, with grey already showing at his temples and a scar that ran from his left ear to his collarbone. He approached me in the training yard during a formation exercise break. Most men used breaks to rest or to engage in the constant small violences that characterized Penal Legion existence. He simply walked over and stood next to me, looking out at the rust-colored landscape beyond the training ground perimeter. "You killed Varus," he said. "Not a question. He made it necessary," I said. "He made it necessary for 6 others before you. You are the first who succeeded." He glanced at me briefly. "You are careful. Careful men survive longer." "Survival is not guaranteed," I said, repeating the phrase the commissars used. "No, but it can be improved through cooperation." I said nothing. Cooperation was another word for alliance, and alliance required trust. "I am not suggesting a group," he said, as if reading my calculation. "Groups draw attention. I am suggesting mutual awareness. 2 men who watch for threats and share information survive longer than 2 men who operate in isolation." "What do you want?" I asked. "To live long enough to earn pardon, to return to something that resembles a life." He looked at me directly then. "I do not expect friendship. I do not expect loyalty beyond tactical advantage. I expect recognition that 2 capable men are more difficult to kill than 1." I considered this. It was logical. It was also dangerous. But everything in the Penal Legion was dangerous, and choosing between risks was the only agency we possessed. "Acceptable," I said. He nodded. We did not shake hands. We did not make declarations. We simply established recognition that we would share information relevant to survival. That was sufficient. Over the next 3 days, I learned that Kale processed the Penal Legion differently than most, where others responded with constant aggression or submission, he calculated. He observed patterns in the commissars' behavior, which infractions they punished immediately, which they ignored, which officers were more likely to execute, and which preferred non-lethal discipline. He tracked the formation hierarchy, identifying who controlled which sections and how that control shifted. He watched the supply distribution, noting when extra rations appeared and who received them. He shared this information with me. I shared my observations in return, which men were planning violence, which were breaking under the psychological pressure, which were informants for the commissariat. We did not meet regularly. We did not draw attention to our association. We simply exchanged brief observations during formation exercises or evening rations, information compressed into a few sentences that could be spoken without attracting notice. I did not trust him. Trust was not required. He provided useful information. I provided useful information in return. That was the extent of our relationship. I understood that if circumstances changed, if keeping me alive became less advantageous than abandoning me, he would do so without hesitation. I would do the same. The deployment orders arrived on day 41 of training. We assembled in full formation while the commissar read the assignment. The 87th Penal Legion would deploy to a war zone designated Kotar IV, a frontier world under assault by Orc invasion forces. The Imperial Guard regiments assigned to the defense were taking heavy casualties. The Penal Legion would reinforce the defensive lines in sectors deemed too dangerous for standard guard deployment. "You will be transported to Kotar IV via bulk conveyance," the commissar said. "Transit time estimated at 43 days. Upon arrival, you will be deployed directly to combat zones. You will hold assigned positions against enemy assault. You will fight until the enemy is destroyed, until you are dead, or until you receive orders to withdraw. There will be no rotation from the front lines. There will be no leave. There will be no mercy for cowardice. He explained the redemption system. Acts of exceptional valor would be noted by observing commissars and logged in our service records. Sufficient accumulation of exceptional service could result in sentence commutation or pardon after the campaign. Survival alone earned nothing. Bravery in the face of certain death earned consideration. You are criminals, he said. You will die as criminals, or you will die as soldiers. The Imperium allows you to choose. Choose wisely. We loaded into troop transports that evening. 10,000 men divided among 4 ships, conditions worse than the prison hollers that had brought us to the training ground. I found myself in a hold with 2,000 others, sleeping in stacked bunks with 40 centimeters of clearance between levels. The air recycling system could not keep pace with the human heat and exhalation. Within 3 days, the temperature in the hold stabilized at approximately 38 degrees. Within a week, the smell became something that physical description cannot adequately capture: sweat, waste, fear, and the particular odor of too many humans existing in too small a space. The violence continued during transport. Men died from fights, from suicide, from infections that medical staff could not or would not treat. By day 20 of transit, we had lost 119 men. The bodies were processed through the ship's reclamation systems. I did not ask what happened to them. Knowing would not change anything. Kale and I maintained our information exchange. He had secured a bunk location near a ventilation shaft that provided slightly better air circulation. I had identified which commissars were assigned to our transport and their movement patterns through the holds. We shared rations when one of us managed to secure extra through theft or trade. We watched each other during the random violence that erupted in the holds, not intervening directly, but positioning ourselves to provide warning if threat escalated beyond manageable levels. I still did not trust him, but I had begun to recognize his presence as a marker of relative stability in an environment where everything else was chaos. This was not friendship. This was tactical advantage processed through human proximity. I told myself this repeatedly. I needed to believe it was true. On day 37 of transit, a group of 7 men decided they could overpower the commissar assigned to our hold section and seize control of the ship. They were wrong. The commissar killed 4 of them personally with his bolt pistol. The ship's armsman killed the other 3 when they attempted to breach the bridge access corridor. The commissar assembled the entire hold afterward and had us stand at attention while he explained in precise detail what would happen if anyone else attempted mutiny. Then he selected 50 men at random and executed them, 1 bolt round each. The bodies fell in formation. We stood and watched. When he finished, he holstered his bolt pistol and dismissed us back to our bunks. The bodies remained in formation for 6 hours before being removed. Collective punishment for collective failure, he said. Remember that your actions implicate everyone near you. Police yourselves, or I will police you. I had spoken to one of them twice, brief exchanges about ration distribution. He had seemed reasonable, competent. He had died because 7 men he did not know had attempted something he had not participated in. Random selection, random death. The demonstration was clear. Individual actions were irrelevant. We were a collective, and collectives were punished collectively. Kale said nothing about the executions. We simply returned to our bunks and resumed existence. Speaking about it would serve no purpose. We all understood what had been demonstrated. We all knew it would happen again. We arrived at Kotar IV on day 43. The planet was classified as Agri-World designation, though from orbit I could see large sections burning. The Orc invasion had consumed the primary continent and was advancing on the secondary population centers. Imperial Guard regiments held defensive positions along a front that stretched 3,000 kilometers. The 87th Penal Legion would be inserted into the sectors experiencing the heaviest assault pressure. They loaded us into dropships, massive atmospheric transports that carried 500 men each. The descent took 40 minutes. The interior was lit by red emergency lighting that made everyone look like corpses. No one spoke. The ship shook during atmospheric entry, metal screaming under thermal stress. I gripped my lascan and focused on breathing. The man next to me vomited from the descent motion. The recycled air carried the smell of fear. We landed 6 kilometers behind the front lines in a staging area that consisted of prefabricated structures and muddy ground churned by vehicle tracks. They assembled us in formation immediately. A different commissar briefed us, not Brecht from training, but another whose name I did not catch. He explained our assignment. The Penal Legion would hold a defensive sector designated Zone Crimson. 7. A 15-kilometer front where Orc forces had been conducting continuous assault for 9 days. The Guard Regiment, previously holding the zone, had been reduced to 30% effective strength and withdrawn. We would replace them. Zone Crimson. 7 has the highest casualty rate on the continent, the Commissar said. The enemy assaults in waves of thousands. They do not retreat. They do not tire. They will continue until you are dead or they are dead. You will hold the line. You will fight bravely. You will earn your redemption in blood, or you will die as criminals. There is no third option. He dismissed us to squad assignments. The Penal Legion was organized into squads of 10 men each, commanded by whoever the commissariat deemed least likely to immediately get everyone killed. Kale and I were assigned to the same squad. Whether by chance or because someone had noted our association, I could not determine. Our squad leader was a former gang enforcer named Dresch, who had killed 17 men before his arrest. He had been with the Penal Legion since its formation. He had survived the training. He had survived the transport. He demonstrated competence through continued existence. "Listen carefully," Dresch said when our squad assembled. "I do not care what you did before. I do not care who you were. I care that you follow orders and kill the enemy when he comes. Do that, and you might survive long enough to earn pardon. Fail to do that, and you will die. I will not mourn you. I will simply report your death and continue." He explained the tactical situation. The Orcs assaulted in massive infantry charges, supported by crude vehicles and artillery. They outnumbered us significantly but lacked discipline and coordination. Our defensive positions were fortified trenches with overlapping fire lanes. We would hold position and shoot until the enemy was dead, or we were overrun. If overrun, we would fight in close combat until we died. Retreat without orders was execution. Cowardice was execution. Survival meant killing more of them than they killed of us. "Questions?" Dresch asked. No one spoke. "Good. Collect ammunition and move to your assigned trench section. The enemy will likely assault at dawn. Prepare yourselves." We collected ammunition from supply stations, 6 charge packs per man, standard load for Penal Legion operations. No grenades. No special equipment. Just las guns and charge packs and whatever personal weapons we had manufactured or stolen. I had kept the sharpened metal piece from training. Kale had a knife he had acquired during transport, traded for 3 days of rations. Others carried clubs, chains, improvised weapons constructed from whatever materials they could scavenge. The trenches were exactly as described, deep channels cut into earth, reinforced with sandbags and metal plating scavenged from destroyed vehicles. The mud was ankle-deep in most places. Bodies from the previous defenders remained in some sections, partially buried or stacked against trench walls where they had died. No one had time to remove them. We simply claimed firing positions among the dead and waited. Night fell. The Orcs did not assault in darkness. They preferred daylight killing, according to Dresch. We took turns on watch, 2 men per squad active while others attempted to rest. I could not sleep. I lay in mud that smelled of decay and listened to the sounds of the front, distant weapons fire, explosions, the mechanical grinding of vehicles moving in the darkness. Occasionally, I heard screaming. I could not determine if it came from orcs or humans. The acoustics made everything distorted. Kale took watch position next to mine. We sat in silence for an hour before he spoke. "I lied during training," he said quietly, "about why I was convicted. I said nothing. Lies were common. Truth was rare. Both were irrelevant. I did refuse to execute civilians," he continued. "But that was not why they convicted me. They convicted me because I killed the officer who ordered it, and then I killed the 3 enforcers who tried to arrest me afterward. 4 deaths. They called it mutiny." "Why tell me this now?" I asked. "Because we will probably die tomorrow, or the day after, or the day after that, and I wanted one person to know that I did something that mattered before I became this." He gestured at the trench, the mud, the darkness. "Before I became a criminal waiting to die earning redemption I will probably never receive." I considered his words. I understood the impulse, the desire to be known as something other than a designation number and a criminal record. But understanding did not make it less futile. "Your reasons do not change what we are now," I said. "No," he agreed. "But they change what I was. That still matters to me." The sound reached us before we could see them. A rolling thunder that was thousands of boots striking earth in uncoordinated rhythm, mixed with bellowing roars and the mechanical grinding of their crude vehicles. The sun was barely above the horizon, casting long shadows across the killing field that separated their lines from ours. Then they appeared at the tree line, 800 meters distant, a green tide that seemed to have no end, pouring from the forest in a mass that defied accurate counting. "Hold fire," Dresh commanded. "Wait for effective range." I watched them come. They were larger than I had expected from the briefing materials, easily 2.5 meters tall, massively built, moving with a loping gait that covered ground faster than seemed possible for their bulk. They carried an assortment of weapons, crude guns that looked like they had been assembled from scrap metal, massive blades, clubs studded with metal spikes. Some rode in vehicles that belched black smoke and seemed held together by nothing more than momentum and violence. They did not advance in formation. They simply charged, a chaotic mass driven by whatever instinct or madness motivated their species. The sound of their approach grew louder as they closed the distance. 600 meters, 500, 400. "First rank, prepare to fire," Dresh ordered. I raised my lasgun to the firing step, sighting down the barrel at the approaching mass. My hands were steady. I noted this with some surprise. I had expected fear to manifest physically, but my body remained calm, processing the moment as simply another problem requiring solution. Aim, fire, repeat until the enemy was dead or I was. Fire. The trench erupted. 2,000 lasguns firing simultaneously created a sound like continuous thunder. The last bolts formed visible streams of light arcing across the killing field into the orc mass. I fired, aimed at center mass of the nearest target, and pulled the trigger. The lasgun kicked against my shoulder. The orc stumbled, but did not fall. I fired again. Twice more. On the 4th shot, he went down. The entire orc front line was collapsing under the fire volume, bodies dropping by the dozens, but the mass behind simply trampled over the fallen and continued forward. 300 meters. 250. The commissars were walking the trench line behind us, bolt pistols drawn, watching for anyone who stopped firing or showed signs of breaking. I burned through my first charge pack in what felt like seconds. Ejected it, slapped in the second, resumed firing. The orcs were at 200 meters now. Individual features became visible: scarred green skin, crude armor plating, mouths full of massive teeth opened in continuous roaring. They were firing their weapons now, crude projectiles, that sprayed across our lines with more enthusiasm than accuracy. Men were dying around me, hit by the random fire, or simply collapsing from wounds I had not seen them receive. 150 meters, 100. Dresh was screaming orders to maintain fire discipline. The commissar behind our section executed a man who had thrown down his lascan and tried to climb out of the trench. The bolt round took him in the back of the head, and he fell back into the mud at our feet. No one moved to pull him aside. We simply fired around the body. Kale was to my left, firing with mechanical precision. Aim, fire, acquire new target, fire again. His face showed no expression. He could have been on a training range. A massive orc broke through the fire at 70 meters, larger than the others, wearing armor that seemed to be layered metal plates bolted directly into his flesh. He carried a blade the size of a man. Last fire hit him repeatedly, but he kept coming. 50 meters. 40. At 30 meters, concentrated fire from an entire squad section finally brought him down. He fell forward with enough momentum that his body slid another 5 meters, coming to rest 25 meters from our trench line. The mass behind him had thinned. The fire volume was devastating to their charge. Bodies piled so thick in some sections that the following waves had to climb over the dead to advance. Then they broke. Not retreated. Orcs do not retreat in any organized sense, but the charge lost cohesion. The survivors fell back in chaotic groups, still firing, still roaring but no longer advancing. The commissar called ceasefire. The sudden silence was almost worse than the noise. My ears rang. The air smelled of ozone from the last fire and something organic and burning. Casualties, Dresh called out. Our squad had lost 3 men. One was the soldier the commissar had executed. The other 2 had taken hits during the assault. One was dead, last burns across his chest, suggesting he had been hit by one of the orc weapons at close range. The other was dying, gut shot, bleeding internally, making sounds that I tried not to hear. The squad medic, a thin man with trembling hands, examined him briefly and shook his head. "Nothing I can do," the medic said. "He will not last the hour." Dresh put a last round through the dying man's head. "Conservation of resources," he said flatly. "Ammunition, medical supplies, and time are not wasted on the unsalvageable." No one objected. We dragged the bodies to the back of the trench and resumed positions. The orcs would assault again. This was simply the interval between waves. The second assault came 3 hours later, then a third in the afternoon, then a fourth as the sun was setting. Each time, the pattern repeated. Mass charge across the killing field, devastating fire from our positions, bodies piling in front of the trenches, eventual break and withdrawal when casualties became too severe even for orc tolerance. Each assault lasted between 15 and 30 minutes. Each left dozens or hundreds of orc bodies and a percentage of our formation dead. By nightfall of the first day, our squad had lost 6 of the original 10. Dresh, Kale, myself, and one other, a former thief named Vict, who spoke rarely and whose hands moved constantly, checking his equipment and weapons with obsessive repetition. The commissariat consolidated surviving squads into new formations. We received 4 replacements from decimated units. I did not learn their names. They would probably be dead within days. The orcs did not assault at night, but they made noise. Bellowing, mechanical sounds, the grinding of their vehicles. The purpose seemed to be sleep deprivation. It worked. I managed perhaps 2 hours of unconsciousness in fragmented periods, always jerking awake to perceived threats that were usually nothing. Kale sat next to me during one of the watch rotations. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally he said, "I have been counting." "Counting what?" "Confirmed kills count toward redemption assessment. I have 37 confirmed from today. How can you confirm kills in that chaos?" I asked. I marked them. Specific targets I tracked through 4. It is not perfectly accurate, but it is documented. He paused. You should track yours as well. Redemption requires evidence. I had not been counting. I had simply been firing at whatever target presented itself, trying to stay alive through the next second, the next minute, the next assault wave. The concept of tracking individual kills during that chaos seemed absurd, but Kale was correct. The system required documentation. Survival alone earned nothing. "How many do you estimate I should claim?" I asked. "Conservative estimate based on observed fire discipline and target saturation, 20 to 30. Claim 20 to 5. Defensible if challenged." This was why he survived, I realized. Not just physical competence, but understanding the system's requirements and optimizing behavior to meet them. He was not merely fighting the orcs, he was fighting the redemption bureaucracy, documenting his performance in terms that would be recognized and valued. "I will track going forward," I said. He nodded. We sat in silence after that, two criminals covered in mud and blood, calculating our path to redemption through accounting methods. The second day was worse than the first. The orcs adapted their tactics, not through intelligence or planning, but through the simple evolution of trying different approaches, until one worked better. They concentrated their assault on a narrower front, accepting higher casualties in exchange for greater pressure on specific trench sections. Our section held, but the section 200 meters south was overrun in the afternoon assault. I watched it happen. The orcs broke through the trench line in a surge of green bodies and violence. The Penal Legion soldiers fought in close combat for approximately 4 minutes before being overwhelmed. The commissars pulled back survivors from adjacent sections and ordered artillery strikes on the breached position. The bombardment killed the orcs who had broken through and any Penal Legionnaires who had survived the initial overrun. Acceptable losses to prevent exploitation of the breach. They filled the gap with a consolidated formation drawn from reserve casualties, men too wounded for frontline service, but still capable of holding a position and firing a lasgun. Most would be dead by tomorrow. Everyone knew this. No one spoke about it. On the third day, Vict died. An orc projectile hit him in the throat during the morning assault. He bled out in 30 seconds, drowning in his own blood before anyone could attempt treatment. Dresch did not bother shooting him. He was clearly dead. We simply pushed his body to the back of the trench and continued firing. The replacements in our squad died across the following 2 days. I did not learn their designations. They existed briefly, fired their lasguns with varying degrees of competence, and were killed by orc fire or close combat or commissar execution for failures I did not witness. The commissariat sent new replacements. The cycle continued. By day 7, the pattern had become routine. Wake before dawn, prepare weapons and equipment, wait for the assault, fire until the charge breaks, consolidate casualties, receive replacements if available, repeat. The violence became background process, something that happened with regularity like meals or sleep. Men died with such frequency that individual deaths lost significance. They were simply data points in the attrition calculation. I had stopped feeling anything about it. I noted this absence with clinical interest. Early in the deployment, deaths had registered as events requiring emotional processing. Now they were simply logistical updates, resources expended, formation strength reduced, tactical situation adjusted accordingly. The part of me that would have been disturbed by this absence had itself been abraded away by repetition and proximity to death. Kale maintained his kill count documentation. He was at 247 by day 8. I was tracking as well now. 193 confirmed. The numbers were somewhat arbitrary. Accurate counting was impossible in the chaos, but they were defensible estimates that demonstrated engagement. The commissars periodically reviewed squad performance. High kill counts correlated with survival priority when resources were allocated. This was not officially stated, but the pattern was observable. Soldiers who demonstrated exceptional performance received better ammunition allotments, first access to medical treatment for non-fatal wounds, and slightly larger ration distributions. The system rewarded effectiveness. This created incentive to fight harder, which was the system's purpose. I understood this. I participated in it anyway because participation improved survival probability. On day 9, they rotated our squad to a different trench section. The previous occupants had been reduced to 3 survivors from an original formation of 80. The section was worse than our previous position. The mud was deeper, the bodies more numerous, and the fire angles less favorable. But rotation was mandatory. Units that held the same position too long lost effectiveness through psychological degradation. Moving men to different sections of the same horror maintained the illusion of variation. The new section placed us adjacent to a regular guard regiment's position. Not penal legion, but standard Imperial Guard. The contrast was visible even from a distance. Their uniforms were cleaner. Their equipment was better maintained. They had fortifications beyond basic sandbags. Most significantly, they had support elements, heavy weapons teams, medical staff supply lines that actually functioned. During a lull between assaults, one of the guard soldiers approached our trench section. He was young, perhaps 20, with clean skin that suggested he had not been in the trenches long. He stared at us with an expression that mixed curiosity and disgust. "You are the penal legion?" he asked. "Yes," Dresh said. "They said you were criminals. Murderers." "That is accurate." The guard soldier looked at the bodies piled in our trench section, at the blood and mud covering our uniforms, at the crude weapons we had manufactured to supplement our Laskans. "How do you live like this?" Dresh laughed. It was a sound without humor. "We do not live, we simply die slower than expected." The guard soldier left quickly after that. I watched him return to his position, saw him speaking with his squadmates, saw them looking toward our section with expressions I could not read from distance. They would hold their position with pride and discipline. They would fight for the Emperor and the Imperium. They would believe their service mattered. We would fight because the alternative was execution. We would accumulate kills because kills earned redemption. We would survive because survival was the only victory available to criminals. The distinction seemed meaningful. Perhaps it was. I was no longer capable of evaluating such questions with clarity. On day 12, the Commissar visited our section during the evening stand-down. He reviewed our kill count documentation with Dresh. He examined the logs Kale and I had maintained. He asked specific questions about engagement ranges, target identification, ammunition efficiency. This was the redemption assessment process. Periodic evaluation of performance to determine who had earned consideration for sentence reduction. "Your documentation is acceptable," the Commissar said to Kale. "Your confirmed kills exceed threshold requirements for exemplary service notation. Continue current performance." No expression, simply acknowledgement of information received. The Commissar turned to me. "Your documentation is less detailed but within acceptable parameters. Your kill count is sufficient, however." He paused, reviewing a data slate. "You have not demonstrated leadership initiative. Exceptional valor requires more than competent execution of basic duties." "What additional demonstration is required?" I asked. "Opportunity will present itself. Recognize it. Act decisively. Leadership under fire earns greater redemption credit than simple combat effectiveness." He moved on to evaluate the next soldier. I understood what he meant. The system rewarded not just fighting ability, but active participation in the leadership structure. Volunteers for dangerous assignments, initiative during combat, actions that extended beyond following orders into actively enabling the machine. I would need to become more than a component. I would need to become an instrument. The opportunity presented itself on day 14. An orc assault broke through a section 800 meters from our position. The breakthrough was significant. Approximately 200 orcs had penetrated the trench line and were advancing into the rear staging area where ammunition and medical supplies were stored. The commissariat called for volunteers to form a counter-assault force to contain the breach before it widened. 30 men volunteered. I was one of them. Kale was another. Dresh led the formation. The commissar briefed us quickly. Advance to the breach point, engage the orcs in the staging area, hold position until reinforcements arrive to restore the trench line. Survival probability was estimated at approximately 40%. We advanced in loose formation through the support trenches. The sounds of combat grew louder as we approached. Weapons fire, explosions, screaming in multiple languages. The staging area was chaos when we arrived. Orcs were destroying supply containers, killing the support personnel who had been caught in the breakthrough, advancing deeper into our defensive zone. Dresh ordered us to form a firing line and engage. We did. The close-range firefight lasted approximately 8 minutes. The orcs were contained but not eliminated. They fell back to positions among the supply containers and returned fire. We were pinned, unable to advance without taking catastrophic casualties. I saw the problem. The orcs were using a cluster of ammunition containers as cover. The containers were marked with standard warning symbols indicating explosive contents. If the containers detonated, the explosion would kill the orcs using them as cover. It would also kill any of us within 50 meters and destroy the ammunition supplies we were defending. The tactical calculation was simple. Detonate the containers, accept the ammunition loss, and friendly casualties as acceptable cost to eliminate the breakthrough threat. I told Dresh the assessment. He looked at the containers, at the orcs, at our formation. If you are wrong about the blast radius, you will kill half our force. If we do not eliminate them now, they will advance and kill all of us, I said. The containers will detonate eventually anyway, when the firefight continues. He considered this for perhaps 5 seconds. Then he nodded. Do it. I will pull the formation back to minimum safe distance. I moved forward through the supply area, using destroyed containers as cover. The orcs were focused on the main formation and did not see me flanking. I reached a position 20 meters from the ammunition containers. I sighted my las gun carefully, aiming at the base of the nearest container where the warning symbols indicated greatest volatility. I fired 6 shots in rapid sequence. The last bolts burned into the container surface. Nothing happened for perhaps 2 seconds. Then the container erupted. The explosion was massive. A fireball that expanded outward and consumed everything within 30 meters. The orcs disappeared in the blast. The adjacent containers detonated in sympathetic explosions. The sound was beyond description. The blast wave threw me backward. I hit something hard and stopped processing sensory input for an indeterminate period. When awareness returned, I was lying in wreckage, covered in debris, unable to hear anything except the high-pitched ringing. I could see smoke and flames, bodies, movement in the smoke that resolved into Dresh, dragging me out of the impact zone. He was shouting something. I could not hear him. I tried to stand and discovered my left leg was not responding correctly. Dresh pulled me further from the fire, into a trench section where the rest of the counter-assault force had taken cover. Kale was there, his face blackened with soot, but apparently uninjured. He was looking at me with an expression I could not identify. Medical staff arrived. They examined my leg, which had sustained shrapnel wounds and possible fracture. They injected something that made the pain recede to distant background noise. They told me I would be evacuated to the rear medical station for treatment. I told them I could still fight. They ignored me and loaded me onto a stretcher. As they carried me away, I saw the commissar approaching Dresh. They spoke briefly. The commissar looked toward me, nodded, made a notation on his data slate. I had demonstrated leadership initiative. I had acted decisively under fire. I had accepted personal risk to eliminate a significant threat. The action was logged. The redemption credit was earned. I had also killed 7 men from our own formation who had been within the blast radius when the containers detonated. This was not logged in the official report. Acceptable casualties in successful tactical action, collateral losses that did not require documentation. I knew their designations. I had served with 3 of them for 9 days. I had watched them fight. I had shared rations with 1 during a rest period. I had killed them to eliminate the orcs and to demonstrate leadership that would earn redemption credit. The tactical mathematics were sound. The moral mathematics were more complex. I processed this complexity for perhaps 30 seconds, then filed it as irrelevant. The system rewarded the action. The system defined morality. I had optimized my behavior within the system's parameters. That was sufficient. I was evacuated to the rear medical facility, where they treated my leg with basic stabilization, tissue bonding, and metal reinforcement pins to repair the fracture. The treatment was functional, not complete. I would limp for the rest of my life, but I would be able to walk and fight, which was all the system required. I spent 4 days in the medical facility. The conditions were only marginally better than the trenches. Overcrowded tents, insufficient supplies, medical staff overwhelmed by casualty volume. Men died on stretchers waiting for treatment. Men died during treatment when medical supplies ran out or when triage decisions determined their injuries were too severe to justify resource expenditure. I watched this with clinical detachment. The system allocated resources according to survival probability and combat value. I had sufficient value to justify treatment. Others did not. Kale visited on day 2 of my medical stay. He had been granted brief leave from the front to escort wounded personnel to the medical facility. He found me in the recovery tent, lying on a cot among 60 others in various states of injury. "You are intact," he observed. "Mostly," I said. My leg throbbed despite the pain suppressants. "The leg will function adequately. The Commissar logged your action as exceptional valor. You received significant redemption credit." "Good." He sat on the edge of the cot. Around us, men moaned or wept or stared at nothing. "You killed Harva, Tex, Yorick, Ven, Malus, Cray, and Destrain when you detonated those containers." I had not known their names. Designations, yes, but not names. Kale had learned their names somehow. This seemed like unnecessary data collection. "The containers needed to detonate," I said. "The orcs were using them as cover. If we had not eliminated them, the breach would have widened." "I know." The tactical decision was correct. He looked at me with that expression again, the one I could not identify. "I observed your face when you made the decision. You did not hesitate. You calculated the costs and benefits and acted immediately. No doubt, no moral struggle, simply execution." "Hesitation would have resulted in mission failure," I said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "I have killed many men. In the Enforcers during my arrest, in the Penal Legion. Every time before, I felt something. Regret, anger, necessity, something. But in the trenches, I feel less with each death. I am becoming efficient." I understood what he was describing. The same process was occurring in me. The systematic erosion of emotional response, through repetition and necessity. We were being processed by the system, transformed from men who killed reluctantly into men who killed without internal resistance. "Is that what redemption costs?" he asked. "Becoming efficient killers who feel nothing?" The question assumed redemption was something other than survival. I was no longer certain that distinction existed. "We are criminals," I said. "The system is redeeming us by converting us into weapons. That is its purpose. Whether we feel anything about the conversion is irrelevant to the outcome." He nodded slowly. "Then we are already redeemed. We are already weapons." He left shortly after. I lay in the medical cot and processed his words. He was correct. We had been transformed. The men we had been, the enforcer who refused to execute civilians, the underhiver who killed over debt, those men no longer existed in any meaningful sense. We were 873210 and 87744318. We were confirmed kill counts and redemption credits and combat efficiency ratings. We were components in the Imperium's machinery, optimized through violence to serve our function without hesitation. This should have disturbed me. I noted the absence of disturbance with clinical interest. The capacity for being disturbed had been processed out, consumed by the same system that was converting me into a weapon. I returned to the front on day 18. My leg functioned adequately. I could walk, run when necessary, maintain position during combat. The limp was permanent, but did not significantly degrade combat effectiveness. I was assigned back to Dresch's squad. Kale was still alive. The other positions had been filled with replacements I did not know. The fighting continued. Day 19, 20, 23, 27. The orcs assaulted. We held position and killed them in quantities that became routine. The bodies piled so high in some sections that we used them as additional fortification, stacking orc corpses into barricades that we fired from behind. The 87th Penal Legion was being consumed according to projections. We had started with 10,000 men. By day 30, approximately 4,000 remained combat effective. The rest were dead, too wounded to fight, or had been executed for various infractions. The Commissariat noted our casualty rate as within acceptable parameters for Penal Legion deployment. On day 34, the orcs changed tactics again. Instead of frontal assaults, they attempted infiltration, small groups moving through the ruins and craters under cover of darkness, trying to reach our trenches undetected. We adjusted our defensive posture accordingly, maintaining full alert through the night and implementing patrol patterns to detect infiltrators before they reached our lines. I was assigned to a patrol on day 36. 10 men moving through the ruins 50 meters in front of our trench line, watching for orc movement. Kale was with me. Dresch led the patrol. We moved in tactical formation, each man covering a sector, communication limited to hand signals. We found them 20 minutes into the patrol. A group of 12 orcs hiding in a collapsed structure, preparing to advance on our trench line during the early morning hours. Dresch signaled for silent elimination. We could not fire without alerting other potential infiltration groups to our patrol presence. Close combat in darkness with orcs is not something I can adequately describe. It was violence compressed into confined space, each movement a calculation between killing and being killed, everything happening too fast for conscious thought. I used my knife and the sharpened metal piece I had carried since training. I killed 2 orcs in perhaps 30 seconds, stabbing repeatedly at anything that presented itself as target until movement stopped. The patrol killed all 12 orcs. We lost 4 men, killed by orc blades or simply overwhelmed by the physical mass and strength differential. Kale survived. Dresch survived. I survived covered in orc blood and my own from wounds I had not felt receiving. We returned to the trench line. Medical examined us. My wounds were superficial, lacerations and contusions that required basic treatment, but did not compromise combat capability. Kale had sustained a broken finger and multiple contusions. Dresch was uninjured, which seemed statistically improbable but was consistent with his survival through the entire campaign. The Commissar logged the patrol action as exceptional performance. All surviving patrol members received redemption credit. I was now at 473 confirmed kills, plus multiple exceptional valor citations. According to the redemption assessment criteria, I was approaching threshold for consideration of sentence commutation. This should have meant something. Hope, perhaps. Anticipation. Instead, I simply processed it as data. Redemption was becoming probable. This was positive outcome according to my original objectives. I could not make myself care beyond acknowledging the information. On day 43, the offensive shifted. Imperial reinforcements arrived, 3 fresh guard regiments and armor support. The Commissariat ordered a counterattack to break the orc siege and push them back from the defensive perimeter. The 87th Penal Legion would lead the assault. This was standard doctrine. Penal legions were expendable shock troops. Send them forward to absorb the initial casualties and identify enemy defensive positions. Follow with regular guard units to exploit breaches. They assembled the remaining Penal Legion forces, approximately 3,000 men from the original 10,000. The casualty rate had been 70%. This was noted as acceptable performance given the operational parameters. The Commissar briefed us before the assault. You have fought with honor. You have earned the Imperium's recognition. Now you will earn your redemption. Advance across the killing field, engage the enemy in close combat, hold their attention while armor support maneuvers. Die bravely. and your sins will be forgiven." He did not mention that most of us would die. That was understood. They organized us into assault waves. Kale and I were in the second wave, positioned behind the initial shock troops who would absorb the first defensive fire. Dresh was in the first wave. He looked back at us before moving to his position. He nodded once. I do not know what the gesture meant. Acknowledgement, perhaps, or simply confirmation that he understood he would probably not survive. The assault began at dawn. The first wave advanced across the killing field, while artillery prepared the Orc positions with bombardment. I watched from the trench as they moved forward. 3,000 men walking into concentrated fire. They made it approximately 200 meters before the Orc defensive fire became overwhelming. Men fell by the dozens. The wave slowed, hesitated. The commissars behind the line began executing men who stopped advancing. The wave resumed forward movement. They reached 400 meters. The Orc positions were returning fire with everything available: projectile weapons, crude artillery, close-range flamers that turned sections of the advance into burning chaos. The first wave was effectively destroyed at 600 meters. Perhaps 200 men reached the Orc positions and engaged in close combat. They lasted approximately 3 minutes before being overwhelmed. Dresh died somewhere in those 3 minutes. I did not see it happen. I simply knew, with certainty born from pattern recognition, that he had been consumed by the violence. He had survived 43 days through competence and fortune. His fortune had ended. The system had consumed him. The commissar ordered the second wave to advance. We climbed from the trenches and began moving across the killing field. The ground was already covered with bodies from the first wave. We walked over them or between them, using corpses as minimal cover when possible. The Orc fire was continuous. Men fell around me. I kept moving forward because stopping meant execution by the commissars behind us. Kale was to my left, maintaining formation spacing. We did not speak. There was nothing to say. We simply advanced because advancing was the only choice that was not death by friendly fire. At 300 meters, something impacted near me. I felt the blast wave, felt myself lifted and thrown. I hit the ground hard enough to momentarily lose consciousness. When awareness returned, I was lying among bodies, my lasgun missing, my uniform shredded by shrapnel. My left arm was not responding to commands. Blood was spreading across my chest from wounds I could not see. I tried to stand. My leg, the one that had been damaged previously, buckled. I fell back into the mud and bodies. Kale appeared, crawling toward me through the carnage. His face was covered in blood from a head wound. He reached me, assessed my condition quickly. "Can you move?" he asked. "No," I said. "My leg is not functional." He looked toward the Orc positions, then back at the trench line, calculating distances and probabilities. "I can carry you back. The commissars will execute both of us for retreating. I can claim you are critically wounded. Medical evacuation is permitted. You will not make it. The distance is too far under fire. You will die attempting to carry me." He was silent for perhaps 5 seconds. Around us the assault continued. Men advancing and dying, the commissars driving the wave forward, the Orcs maintaining devastating fire. "I am ordering you to leave me," I said. "Continue the advance." "I do not take orders from you," he said. "Then make the tactical calculation. 1 man continuing has probability of survival. 2 men attempting retreat have probability of death. The mathematics are clear." He looked at me with that expression again, and suddenly I understood what it meant. Not recognition or acknowledgement. Grief. He was grieving for what we had become, for the fact that we were calculating survival probability while men died around us, for the knowledge that the correct decision was abandonment. "I will remember you," he said quietly. "That is unnecessary," I said. "I am designation 8774318. Confirmed kills 473. Redemption credits sufficient for sentence consideration. That is adequate record." "Your name was Jarek Vost," he said. "You killed a man over debt. You survived 43 days. You were careful. That mattered." He moved before I could respond. Crawling forward toward the orc positions, leaving me among the bodies, I lay in the mud and watched the assault continue above me. Men advanced and died. The armor support moved forward, massive vehicles that crushed bodies beneath their treads. The orc positions began to collapse under the combined assault. The guard regiments advanced through the breaches the penal legion had created. I could not move. My body was failing systematically. Blood loss, shock, accumulated damage from wounds I had not properly catalogued. I processed this information with detachment. I was dying. This was not unexpected. 43 days of survival in a penal legion deployment to the worst combat zone on Kotar IV had been statistically improbable. The probability had resolved to expected outcome. I thought about Kale's final words. He had used my name, not my designation, the name I had not spoken or heard spoken in over a year, the name of a person who no longer existed. I tried to remember being Jarek Faust, tried to recall what that person had wanted, had feared, had valued. The memories were present but distant, as if they belonged to someone else. A young man who had killed over debt and pride, who had believed violence was power, who had not understood that the Imperium possessed violence at scales that made individual acts meaningless. That person had been processed, consumed by the system, converted into designation 8774318, a component that fought and killed efficiently and documented performance for redemption credit. The conversion had been systematic and thorough. Almost nothing of the original remained. Almost. I held on to Kale's words, held them as evidence that something had mattered beyond the numbers. One person had known my name, had remembered it, had spoken it before leaving me to die. This was more than the system provided. This was human recognition that persisted despite the machine's hunger. The assault wave passed over my position, men advancing, stepping around, or on the wounded who could not continue. No one stopped to check if I was alive. I was not relevant to the advance. I was simply another body in the field of bodies. The battle moved forward. The sounds of combat grew more distant. Eventually, they faded to background noise. I lay in the mud as the sun moved across the sky, bleeding out slowly, consciousness fading in cycles. Medical teams arrived in the afternoon. They were moving through the battlefield, conducting triage on the wounded. A medic examined me briefly. "This one is salvageable," he said to his partner. "Load him for evacuation." I tried to tell them I was penal legion, that salvageable had different criteria for criminals than for regular guard. They ignored me and loaded me into a transport with other wounded. I survived.